Rise and shine, Nightlings. Welcome to episode 26 of the Horror Headquarters. I want to start by apologizing for the delay on this episode, being that I had a weird occurrence with my technology last night. But if you're on Instagram, you'd see me go more into detail on that. But for now, let's go straight into today's episode. This one came up in my dreams a few nights ago, and then again last night. So I feel the need to let it out and share another horror experience I had in Boston. So buckle up and get ready. This one's a terrifying one. Now, when I was in Boston, there's a little trail they have in downtown Boston that connects to a bunch of different landmarks together, like the City Hall, a bunch of churches, a bunch of historic landmarks. And we ended up coming across an old City Hall that had a statue of Benjamin Franklin. And as I was walking towards the statue, I got this really heavy feeling in my stomach, and I didn't know why. And I remember turning to my brother, and I'm like, I don't want to go in there. And he said, No, just let's just go look at it really quick. And I walk up to it, and it had like this whole description on it. And what I found out is beyond terrifying, and I really wish I could unhear it. I found out that in 1998, Benjamin Franklin's house was getting renovated and restored so that it could be turned into a museum. But while they were doing all this, they ended up digging up 10 individuals in the basement, consisting of numerous bones and bone fragments, and 6 of them were identified as possible children. They ended up doing tests on it, and they found out that they were around 200 years old, which mean that they may have been buried in the basement at the same time that Franklin was living there. Now you might be wondering, why am I bringing this up? I had a weird feeling and I thought that was the reason why, and I look behind the statue and there's this ginormous cemetery, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I like started walking out and I'm like, wait, and something stopped me for some reason, and we ended up walking into the cemetery. You heard that correctly. I went against my own will, like I told you guys when I went to Boston. If you guys listened to a couple episodes back when I went to Salem, I tried overcoming my fear of cemeteries. And I kept my composure. I was walking through it, going through the trail, and I remember seeing something. And it was some type of black figure. It wasn't like a full fledged human figure, but it was waiting behind one of the statues. And I thought maybe it's just my eyes being rid of me, like my mind's playing tricks. And it could have been that, but I'm gonna play devil's advocate and think that it was someone's shadow from the dead. Like I said, this is devil's advocate. But it was so weird because I remember not saying anything, but just having this laser focus on one of the statues that was inside the cemetery. And I actually ended up taking a picture of the entire cemetery, and that's the profile picture for this episode, because I know a lot of people are going to think I'm BSing, but I was there, took a picture, and I just remember staring at it and having laser focus, and my brother's like, come on, let's go. And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, what's what? And I just remember walking away. And so I did my own personal research on the area, what it has to do with pertaining to Benjamin Franklin statue, as well as the cemetery, if there's any connection, and you guys will not believe what I found. Now, Benjamin Franklin had numerous connections and interactions in Boston due to his involvement in politics, science, and social circles, as well as astrology and spiritualism. It is said that he must have been very well known of King's Chapel, which was not only a religious center, but also a significant part of Boston's history and culture. Additionally, Franklin's intellectual curiosity and engagement with various communities likely led him to visit and interact with places like King's Chapel. Now, I looked more into it, and I found that he had many discussions and debates about religion, spirituality, often exchanging ideas with fellow intellectuals and religious leaders at King's Chapel. Now, how does this pertain to the bodies found in his basement? Well, he met someone by the name of William Hewson in London, and they were both very interested in the various scientific and medical endeavors, including studies on blood and the circulatory system. I also want to point out that studies of anatomy and the bodies of humans was a very dark study back then, and it was mostly illegal. And this William Hewson in question ended up marrying Ben Franklin's landlady. And William Hewson decided to do studies on the human body in the basement. Now you might be wondering, how did he get these? Many different scientists and researchers believe that they either went grave digging for bodies or kidnapped people. And again, all these studies were done in Benjamin Franklin's own basement. Now today, there's a mixed reaction to this. There's a lot of people that say the bones never existed and that it's all a myth or conspiracy theory to make Benjamin Franklin look bad, while others say that there is evidence and that many figures out there, articles, the government, are denying it so that people don't look further into the entire study. And a lot of these forensic scientists that did studies on the bones, you cannot find their names anywhere, or at least I can't. And it's mostly said to be all a myth, conspiracy theory to get people really interested in the aspect of going to Boston, visiting all these places so that they can make a quick buck. But I'm not sure. I'm gonna play devil's advocate and say that he definitely knew what was happening. He was involved, that the bones were real, because why would they just make it up in 1998 and saying, oh, we found a bunch of bones and it was just all a hoax and it was not real? Now again, Benjamin Franklin's statue is right outside King's Chapel and next to the burial ground outside of King's Chapel. So I think his statue was put there as a mockery to all the people buried there, because they do say that the bones were never found, they don't know where they're buried, all this kind of stuff. I think that they're buried in that ground right there. I think that a lot of the human remains that were found were put in those graves, and that's why I had such a horrible feeling inside my body, like something was going wrong, only to find all this out and all these connections he had to King's Chapel, and he would visit Boston often, and he had a really great connection with people over there. He talked about spirituality and doing tests on human bodies, yet no one seemed to question him, or there's nothing documented that said he was under suspicion at the time. Really interesting. Now, there is a little documentary on PBS called Ben Franklin's Bones. It is for free. It is 54 minutes long, and you just search up Ben Franklin's Bones and you'll find it on PBS. I have watched this, and it is a phenomenal documentary, and it talks about Benjamin Franklin's involvement with the bones that William Hewson utilized for his research in anatomy. Now, this documentary does debunk the idea that William Hewson used real live bodies, and they state in the documentary that he lived near both a cemetery and a ship port where dead bodies would be left for ships to pick up. So this gave him the opportunity to smuggle bodies, or to hire people to smuggle bodies, so that he could do tests on these bodies in his basement without anyone knowing. And over a span of 2 years, he ended up doing anatomy classes in the basement of the building that he was living in, and he would bring students in and they would pay him so that he could teach them about the body, how it works. He also discovered the lymphatic system and the real shape of blood cells. He made a bunch of new discoveries, and he's very well known. I believe he is the father of hematology. You can search it up, but a lot of people think that he actually used real bodies as well, because there was a newborn body that he utilized in his studies. He also used mercury with sea turtles and birds, and he found out that humans have a lymphatic system just like sea turtles. But it's just a way of his studies that were horrifying. Obviously, they didn't know about bacteria and all this kind of stuff as much back then, and the reason for his death was actually cutting himself by accident, and he fell very sick, and within 5 days he was in his deathbed. Now, many researchers state that they absolutely believe that Benjamin Franklin was involved or knew of what was happening in the basement, because he was also very interested in science and in the anatomy of the body and how it worked and how it functioned, and he strived alongside Hewson because he also wanted to make new discoveries to modern medicine and help with people in the future about the study of medicine in the body and the human anatomy. So it's very particular because Hewson was also doing this in another area along with a different scientist, but they got in a big argument, and that's what got him to the same place where Benjamin Franklin was living, because Benjamin Franklin had invited him to come and live in the house, and he ended up marrying the landlady, as I said in the beginning of this episode. And that's when he started conducting all his research and studies in the basement, because he wasn't going to college for anatomy and all this kind of stuff, but he announced himself as an anatomist as he was doing all these different tests. And the interesting part about it is that as soon as Houston died, Benjamin Franklin left as well. And I think the reason he left was that so he wouldn't get connected to all the dead bodies and body parts found in the basement. Now the question remains, how did all of these bones end up buried underground? And did any future tenants discover it that weren't reported in a police report or such and such? Because it opens the door for so much possibility. Did Benjamin Franklin go down and bury them himself before he left? Did Houston have someone do his bidding? Did he hire someone to go bury them underground? Did a future tenant under the same name, one of his descendants, know about this and do it himself so that no one would discover it? I'm unsure, but I think it's leading towards Benjamin Franklin being involved so that he wouldn't get in trouble, nor would his family get in trouble. And when I say family, I mean the Houston family, because there are multiple generations of the Houston family, and one of them that was actually in the documentary is a direct descendant of William Houston, and she's also studying medicine and anatomy, which is very interesting. And they also talk about how this story is very sensitive, how there's so many news reporters today and people, conspiracy theorists, paranormal investigators that don't believe that the bodies were dead at the time, that many of them were alive during the time that he was doing studies on them, that he would murder them and then do studies on them, figuring out the anatomy, hence the heads chopped in half. And let's not forget who discovered electricity. That was Benjamin Franklin, and this was the time that electrical shock therapy was not discovered yet, because that was discovered in the 20th century by Italian psychiatrist Ugo Cerletti and his colleague Lucio Bini. So could Benjamin have been involved in this? Could he have went down and done his own tests on the bodies? Many renowned scientists and researchers believe that Benjamin Franklin definitely put his foot in the door and kept it there until Houston's untimely death. Now, with all this being said, I am very intrigued and interested in learning more about this discovery, as well as traveling to London myself and going visiting the house and taking a tour, listening to a tour guide, learning about the grounds a little bit more, about all the different landmarks that are around his building during his time, and a little bit more about this connection that they had, because William Houston and Benjamin Franklin were extremely close, and they constantly assisted each other in their research. So I think to deny that Benjamin Franklin had any involvement is, and this all leads back to when I was in Boston and I was first discovering his statue, because I had known nothing about this, but yet his statue is right next to a cemetery, is near water, and is next to a chapel, which is very similar to the same layout over in London, as I stated earlier. So I think it's no coincidence that his statue is there. Now I want to get to the dreams that I had about this and why I'm bringing it up right now. Now, ever since leaving Boston and Salem, I've had some of the worst nightmares of my life about recalling certain things that happened over there that I will continue to explain during my time here on the horror headquarters, which will be forever until I'm 90. But I am very overwhelmed with the amount of connections that I've made over there, as well as the constant reminders of all the things that I experienced. And this is one of them. Now, a dream that I had a couple days ago, I had a dream that I woke up in a cemetery and it was green and black everywhere. And then suddenly, I hit my head on something and I turn around and it's Benjamin Franklin holding a butcher's knife. And I didn't know the significance behind it and I thought it was nothing. And then 2 nights ago, I have a similar dream of it starting off where the previous one ended, and me walking around the statue and then finding a bunch of bones on the floor. And I start looking around very mysteriously, like trying to figure out where all these bones came from. and I find a little pit over at the corner next to a chapel, and it's a grave dug out. And I'm like thinking, oh, this is probably where all the bones came from. But I'm like, what's the reasoning behind it? And I turn back and I like start walking towards it, and I get that very murky, eerie feeling in my stomach again. And I wake up, I write all this down, and then I start doing my research on it. And then, hence, this episode came to life because of that experience. Now, it's something that I definitely won't be able to forget because these dreams were so detailed, and I could still, if I close my eyes, I can still see them happening. And I know obviously dreams are a reflection of a bunch of different things. There's so much about the dream world that we don't know, that people don't really look into, or at least isn't televised or given to us in a very educational way. But after doing thorough research on this whole aspect and learning about all the things that I talked about in this episode of the podcast, I was completely blown away, terrified, and scared because my dreams were hinting to me about Benjamin Franklin's past, about the bones behind his statue, him holding a butcher knife, a grave being dug out, all of these connecting to the story that I was just talking about. And it leaves me very unsettled because the fact that there was newborn children, that there was kids, that there was so many different types of bodies found in the basement, like in bones. And actually, after watching the documentary, it wasn't 10 bodies, it was 28. 28 bodies dissected in a basement. I don't know how any of the tenants in that building where it was all happening survived, because they said the smell was so horrid that it could have spread through the entire building, because during this time there was no sanitary things. He did all of this with his bare hands. There was like no protocol or rules as to how to deal with this kind of stuff. Like I said, this was still in the developing stages, hence why him and Benjamin Franklin are known as like the fathers of modern medicine. They're very well known for their contributions, and it's all as a result of this. And they always wondered how they made all these assumptions, why they're not in any books. And in 1998, of course, we found out why, and we're continuing to find out why. It is poll result time. The previous poll result question was, should gothic / period horror be revived? And the first place was actually tied between need to come back for sure and if done properly, yes. And I think these both go hand in hand, because I would want a comeback as well, but only if it's done properly. If it's done in a very lazy way and it makes no sense and it's here to like amuse a certain type of people, then it's not gonna really do anything beneficial. So that was first place. Second place was also tied between definitely and not for me. Third place was a three-way tie between well duh, it's boring so no, and other reply in Q&A. And someone said in the Q&A that gothic horror is top tier, we need more for sure. Someone else said, not my cup of tea, it's very boring, and The Woman in Black was a horrible movie. I respect that. I respect other people's opinions on this movie. I respect your opinions on any type of cinema, except for The Nun. If you talk SHIT on The Nun, we cannot be friends. I don't care, because that movie is phenomenal and no one can tell me otherwise. But thank you guys so much for participating in the poll results and for dropping some things in the Q&A. And I also see some of you guys recommended some new movies, so I will definitely be watching those very soon, and I'm excited to see what I think of them. Bury the hatchet, Nightlings. This marks the end of the 26th episode of the Horror Headquarters. I'm so appreciative of you guys for being so understanding of the situation with the technical issue and the reason why this episode is being released so late. But thank you guys for listening all the way through. If you got this far, I really, really do appreciate it with all my heart, and I'm so blessed to have such an amazing fandom behind me, supporting me, and just making me feel good inside. I loved doing this episode. I feel like it was great for me personally to like get all the dreams that I've had out of my head, as well as the experience I had over there in Boston out, and doing more research on it and learning about all this different kind of stuff was insane to me but appalling at the same time. And I'm definitely interested in looking into it more by, like I said, going to London and learning a little bit more from professionals. Hopefully they will talk to me about it, because this PBS original is supposed to leave PBS this month on the 14th. So if you haven't watched it, highly recommend watching it if you guys want to learn more about the story, because it goes way more in depth. It's like an hour long documentary and a discussion about all the different aspects that led to the bones being discovered and how it dated back and all the different things that happened. So it's very interesting, and I highly, like I said, highly recommend watching it, because they will be removing it. And I think the reason for it is because a lot of people are taking interest in this, especially right now, and they're going to start looking at Benjamin Franklin as a bad person, and then a lot of other controversy is going to break out, and who knows what that'll lead to. So they're trying to get rid of as much evidence as possible. So go watch it. I've dropped it in the description below, but you can also just search up the title I gave you and you guys will be led to the website. If you guys are watching this after the 14th February, send me a message on Instagram at the Horror Headquarters and I'll try to look for a copy for you to watch. Now that brings me to all our different social medias, which the first one being Instagram at the Horror Headquarters. Make sure that you guys are subscribed to our newsletter, on our website, which is all linked below, our Twitter at the Horror HQ, our TikTok at the Horror Headquarters, and also YouTube and YouTube Music now have the Horror Headquarters podcast, being that Google Podcasts is being discontinued April 2nd, 2024. So make sure to go over there and subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't yet. It has all the full-length videos, very easy, very simple to watch, and there will be video episodes soon. There's so much to come for this podcast. I'm beyond excited for you guys all to see it unravel in front of your eyes, and I'm excited for myself to see it all unravel as well. And t-shirt orders are coming in soon, so make sure to keep an eye out for that as well. And if you enjoyed this episode and you're not yet subscribed to us, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Music, Apple Podcasts, all these different platforms that are all linked below. Whatever you're listening on, please hit the follow button and rate us. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm excited to see any questions, comments, or concerns that you guys leave in the Q&A below in the description. And you guys can also send me voice messages now. You don't have to be a Spotify user. Anyone can send voice messages, and who knows, maybe I'll air them one day in an episode. But until next time, tread very lightly and pray for forgiveness. Midnight hour is approaching.